This is the Antec C8 ARGB. It's a $150 case that comes with 3 fans, and it's pretty interesting what they've done. So there's a 140 in the back, standard position, but in the bottom, Antec has gone with 2 160mm fans. And these are actually a little bit thicker than the typical fan as well, and they're reverse blade fans. So already from an airflow standpoint, super interesting, especially at $150. This is an older Lian Li case. This is a 216. That was risky, but it paid off. And it has 2 160mm fans in the front as well. So 160s have been done, but they're pretty uncommon. And this case in the dual chamber style follows our Corsair 6500 review, where we said Corsair forgot how to make a quality computer case. Antec, coming in significantly cheaper and with fans, immediately sets forth to embarrass Corsair by making side panels that don't bend like a banana. So a good start from Antec. So it's a dual chamber glass box from the design popularized by Lian Li. Antec and the C8 has a fanless model as well, which ships as low as $100 with temporary discounts when applicable on Newegg, or it's commonly $130. At $100 for the fanless C8, the case is immediately competitive and almost seems to be taking a Montech approach to establishing itself as a higher quality but budget brand. And what's exciting about it is this is the first kind of good Antec case that we've looked at in a very long time. The last time I personally used an Antec case was probably around 2008 or 9. So it's been a little while, but it looks like they're back. We brought you this video with store.gamersnexus.net. We've recently added a ton of stock over on the store, including our brand new PC case badge magnets. These are a pack of 3, featuring a 2-scale Ryzen CPU badge, an Intel LGA case badge, and a GN logo, all with depth. If you want something functional, check out our PC building anti-static mod mats in the GN15 design, which features PC building diagrams, pinouts for things like Ethernet wiring, 2-scale DRAM references, and a screw tracking grid to help you build your next computer. It serves as a heavy-duty rugged surface to protect the table and your PC parts. We also have our heavy-duty soldering mats with high heat resistance, screw tracking trays molded into the silicone, tool holders, and spool holders. This is all useful for projects like model building, or soldering of course, or as recently pointed out to us, Lego building. Support our independent reviews and efforts to purchase ever more review hardware by grabbing something from us on store.gamersnexus.net. Some really quick history here. So we were kind of surprised when a lot of our viewers didn't know who Antec was when we did the video about their stuff coming out this year at Computex. It makes sense though, just because if you're newer to the PC building game, then there's no real reason to know who they were. But Antec was a big deal. Antec's dominance of the PC case industry peaked before we ever started posting case reviews, at least that's the way it felt, and perception is what matters here. GN was founded in 2008, and Antec was founded in 1986. The first case I personally built in was the Antec Super Landboy, and it was followed later by my next build in the Antec 900. But Antec disappeared due to changes in executive leadership. Somewhere in the 2012 to 2014 era, Antec started pursuing flash-in-the-pan trends. So they went for Bluetooth speakers, battery packs, things of that nature, stuff that anyone could do, and they could do it cheaper than Antec and often better. And it just didn't work. But in the process of pursuing those things, Antec lost its way with PC components, basically stopped making anything relevant. To us, Antec was an aging giant that was sliding into irrelevance with cases like the P8. We paid less and less attention to its output over time. And that's why Antec surprised us when they made the Performance 1 right here. We didn't review this one, but it looked like Antec put some real money and effort into it. And now we get to the Constellation series with the C8. The reason we accepted this review sample was because it looked like Antec was starting to try and not just ship batteries and Bluetooth speakers. The C8 is a conventional dual-chamber design that doesn't break new ground, but it impressed us with touches that are uncommon at its price. Small details like the painted or embossed labels all over the fans, the hard drive cages, and the brackets aren't functional, but they create a feeling of quality. On the white version we're reviewing, everything, even down to the cables and the connectors, ended up white with silver accents. It's a good attention to detail. On the functional side, the bottom intake fans are where it's the most functionally interesting. So first of all, they're recessed. They're pushed down down into the bottom of the case, this is one of the actual practical uses of a dual chamber design, because since there's no power supply down here, similar to what Lian Li is trying to do with the, I think it was the 207, they got the fans closer to intake. There's still sufficient gap here to breathe, and that means it's able to pull air in and get it into the case with fewer obstructions. This is especially true if you start looking at the dust filter, which, although it could use some reinforcement, something we'll talk about, it doesn't have any obstructions at all over that nylon filter. So this is another area where Antec has managed to reduce the blockages to intake while recessing the fans, going with larger fans, bigger hole, you get more volume, normally quieter, and then they also thickened them, where these are 31 millimeters from sort of the bottom to the top of this part of the housing, but then it gets up to closer to 35 or so if you measure it to the top of the lip here. Then Antec also biased both of the fans back towards the GPU. So that's going to hit the GPU core. This hits the power. Flow-through designs should do well in this case because they're going to receive air straight from here and then go up and into the CPU cooler. But the CPU cooler ends up mostly starved for air-directed intake, forced intake from fans. It gets some help from the exhaust fan, and then it will breathe a little bit in through the top of the case. But otherwise, we expect to see really strong thermals on the GPU and then weaker thermals on the CPU as a result of this configuration. But if you're going for a liquid cooler, the focus on the GPU for air makes sense. Radiator compatibility is good. It has up to 3 360mm radiators supported simultaneously. The glass panels have beveled edges so that they mate together closely, and the steel panels are sturdily constructed despite being ventilated, unlike the Corsair 6500s. Again, this case is $130 for the base model or $150 for the ARGB one. That just makes Corsair and their $200 plus attempt look bad. A $20 bump for 3 stock fans is impressive given how unique the fans in question are. To start with, all the fans in the white SKU are completely white, including the cables, the sleeving, and the vibration damping. The rear exhaust fan is a conventional, as they call it, tranquil 140 by 25mm ARGB PWM fan, but the 2 bottom fans are the tranquil 160 by 35s measured at the largest point for the reverse fans. On top of that, all the fans have different cable lengths in order to reach the built-in ARGB and fan hub without slack. Taken together, these small details demonstrate special effort and attention to detail that we've appreciated on competing brands like Height in the past. Along the same lines, there are labels molded and printed throughout the case that remind us of the Height Y70. Antec is molded into the cable grommets, SSD storage unit, and HDD storage unit are pressed into the drive cages, and air duct partition is printed on the, air duct partition, I guess. They're small details, but we like them. The 140 and 120mm adapters to the bottom fan mounts are both labeled as well, and as it ships, the C8 ARGB's 2 160mm fans are installed in the bottom of the case, which is wide open for 160 support with 0 crossbars obstructing intake, even on the filter, which could probably use them. For smaller fans, the adapters need to be installed, but this approach means that Antec gets a wide open, really clear path to intake, and that's rare. Antec claims support for 120mm, 140, and 160 fans at the top of the case, but there are 2 additional sets of mounting holes between that would line up with 130 and 150mm fans. MSI had a case at Computex playing around with 130s. It's not something you really typically see, though. The attention to minutia extends to the accessory kit as well. This is also marked with an Antec logo, so they're truly competing with Height here. Height logo, Height logo, Height logo, Height logo, Height logo, and implied Height logo. Height logo. In addition to an extra set of white Velcro straps and white zip ties, there's a full set of extra rubber dust plugs for the front I/O. We skip those. Every time you take the top panel off, the USB-C dust plug comes with it. Now on its website, Antec advertises cavernous space for extreme liquid cooling. It's not just normal liquid cooling. As for what that actually means, basically the top ends up with a claimed 70mm of support for thickness for the radiator and fans. The side over here can do 100mm, and then the bottom does the most. So theoretically, you could fit up to 135mm of cooling here in what would be a massive stack of cooling, but that one is contingent completely on what add-in cards you have and how thick they are for, say, the video card. If you intend to use all three 360mm mounts simultaneously, and technically you could, you should definitely buy the base model, not the ARGB one, because the two unique 160mm fans would need to be removed and would basically go to waste. The fan hub is really simple. It's designed with the expectation that you're not going to add to the stock fans, and it's down in there. If you get an angle look at it, that is the entire thing. Very simple. It's SATA powered with one PWM input and one ARGB input, and these are each split into 3 outputs. One of the bottom fans has daisy chain connectors, so that leaves one open slot on the hub. It's the tidiest possible solution if you don't want to make any changes, but we prefer the fractal approach of leaving a bunch of open headers and making the fan cables extra long. Because the C8's fans have very specific cable lengths, moving them around may require wire extensions, and one of the bottom intake fans has an ARGB connector that's only intended to connect to the other fan. Also, the C8 ARGB comes with 2 different sizes and types of fans, but the hub only accepts one PWM signal and only outputs one TAC signal, which we think is a shortcoming because the actual percent will influence the fans in different ways at different sizes. As for the cages, each of the two 2.5-inch cages holds 2 drives, as does the 3.5-inch one. The C8 is also one of the few cases we've seen recently that's remembered to bother putting rubber vibration damping in the hard drive cage, and it's color matched with the gray rubber elsewhere in the case. On a more critical note, the 3.5-inch drive cage is not officially compatible with 2.5-inch drives, but you could make it work. Also, it doesn't use sleds, and it requires a screwdriver to remove. We'd like to see some toolless options at the back of the case because some thumb screws for the drive cage would work out pretty nice. The mounting points on the case also aren't cross-compatible with the 2.5-inch cages. You can't take one of the 2.5-inch cages and put it where the 3.5-inch cage normally sits, but you almost can, and there's really no good reason not to accommodate it. As for the panel quality, unlike the Corsair 6500 case we reviewed, these have very little flex, so that's true for the side panel, which is much larger as well. So some of Antec's panels use 1mm thick folded over steel, which ensures that it's got some of that structural support, and they also use the panels themselves for the filtration rather than a nylon mesh in some of the locations. So the bottom does have a dust filter, but this top panel does not, and neither does the side panel, which we generally agree with. As long as the whole spacing is more like that, we've been calling it ultra-fine mesh over the years, which you really saw get popularity on the P400A. If it's similar to that porosity and hole spacing, you can get the dust filtration, but you also manage to get the airflow. And so that's what we want to see out. Dust filters do have their place, but in a lot of instances you can eliminate them just with a good mesh panel instead. So this is the side panel. This is another one that benefits from that really thick steel reinforcement on the sides, and Corsair, as a reference, did more of a plastic on its edges, which is why it had those structural issues. The side and front glass panels are also beveled, so they fit perfectly together, in theory. We did notice that there's a little bit of play in the toolless mounting, but the beveling and the point of connection is overall well done. It's not enough to be obvious that they have some play, but the seamless edge, as Antec calls it, is the C8's headlining feature. So ideally, we wouldn't see any gap at all. Typically, case manufacturers put a supporting pillar at the front of the case, especially if they have toolless panels, although the Montech King 95 has been a notable recent exception. Don't put too much weight on that top corner of the C8 though. Side interface power supplies are compatible with the C8, but we also see no advantage to using one for this case. Cable management is already better than it is in some of the other dual chamber cases on the market. There's a deep channel next to the power supply as usual, but the air duct partition is very easy to remove, which makes the tie points inside the channel much more accessible than we see in some cases. Now we're going to get into thermal testing. If you've been paying attention to our case reviews recently, you've probably already seen the C8 in some of the charts. We have some extra numbers here today. So competing against something like the Height Y70, the Corsair 6500s, several of the Lian Li O11D variants these days, the biggest difference between the C8 ARGB and those is that this one includes fans. And so for the fanless cases, we use our standardized set of fans. In this review, we have both the with fans testing, and then we've pulled them out and put in our standardized set as well. So there is a pure like for like against some of the other dual chamber cases that ship without fans, and that also allows us to get a like for like comparison of bottom intake versus side intake to see how it performs for the GPU and the CPU. As for competition, the Antec C8 and C8 ARGB compete most directly with the Montech King 95 and King 95 Pro, where the latter of each of those two comes with fans. So let's get into the numbers. We'll start with the CPU noise-normalized thermals, with the case fans reduced to bring the total noise level down to a threshold of 27 dBA for all cases, as tested in our hemi-anechoic chamber. The C8 ARGB's fan configuration stock is weighted towards GPU cooling, with the two 160s positioned directly below and obstructed by the GPU. There's no intake directly aimed at the CPU cooler, just the exhaust behind it. So it's really not a surprise that the CPU thermal results are at the hotter end of the chart. 50 degrees Celsius over ambient for the average of all CPU cores and 54 degrees for the P cores effectively ties it with the bottom intake Y70 and the 6500X configurations, although the larger and more powerful fans of the C8 give it a small boost over the Y60's stock bottom intake setup, which averaged 53 degrees all-core. The King 95 Pro's performance here was much better than the C8 at 47 degrees average all-core and benefited by the fans closer to the CPU. The side intake is generally better for CPU thermals with our test hardware, but moving the 160mm fans to the side of the C8 ARGB isn't an option. We'll cover that config instead in the standardized fan testing. As we just mentioned, the stock configuration of the C8 ARGB benefits the GPU, so this is the GPU chart. With all of the case fans at full speed, our GPU averaged 41 degrees above ambient, with the memory at 45 and the hotspot at 53. The GPU average is very good here. It's actually close to the Torrent's chart-topping 39-degree result, but its noise levels are significantly lower, putting it in the same category as the side intake height Y70. That makes Antec's C8 more acoustically efficient, as we call it, as compared to the Torrent. It's an impressive result for Antec. Montech's King 95 Pro was warmer with a 46-degree average with a noise level that tied the C8 ARGB. The C8's large bottom intake fans help it when noise normalized for GPU thermals as well, at 42 degrees average versus the Torrent's leading 40 degrees. It's another good result for Antec. The larger fans can move more air at a given noise level, which is also a part of the reason why the Torrent scores so well. The King 95 Pro fell behind with a 48-degree average, which goes to show that filling all the fan slots you can doesn't guarantee the best possible performance, especially when controlling for noise. Actually, we've done videos years in the past where we explicitly show that filling all of the slots often makes it worse, particularly when controlling for noise, but even without. The C8 ARGB shines when noise normalized for GPU thermals. Our standardized fan set fits in the C8 side mount, so we have side intake numbers now. With the standardized fans installed in the same bottom intake slots as the stock fans were, so like for like, the average all-core CPU temperature was 47 degrees above ambient and 51 degrees for just the P cores. Side intake dropped that to 42 all-core and 46 P core. That's a big drop. The C8 CPU thermals are good among side intake dual chambers like the Y70 at 43 all-core and the King 95 at 45. With only the O11D EVO XL side intake result beating the C8s at 41 degrees. That's just side intake though. Cases with conventional front intake layouts like the Torrent are still better for CPU thermals with our test hardware, but it's not as simple as where the fans are. Obviously, everything is contingent on not only the hardware used, but also the design of the case. So front intake isn't going to mean anything if it's obstructed. GPU thermals with standardized fans show that not only did CPU thermals drop with side intake, but GPU thermals slightly improved as well, down from 43 degrees above ambient with bottom intake to 42 with side. If you buy a base model C8 rather than ARGB, we'd recommend starting with side intake for air-cooled builds because generally speaking, it'll be the most even for both core components. For the C8 ARGB, it's not really an option to move the inflexible stock fan layout to the side because of the size. 42 degrees is among the best results on the chart, with a particularly strong result from the height Y70 with side intake beating it by 1 degree. It's basically margin of error. The C8 ARGB's average VRM temperature during noise-normalized torture testing was 33 degrees, right in the middle of the chart. The top panel is mesh, and there's plenty of breathing room above the motherboard, but there's also not much active airflow over the VRM area other than from the rear exhaust fan. The DDR5 SPD reading was similarly middle of the road, but 24 degrees is better than the other bottom intake results on the chart, like the Y70 at 27 degrees and the 6500X at 28. The Antec C8 ARGB is actually built pretty well, and maybe coming off of the 6500 from Corsair helps to reinforce that point, because It's cheaper, the panels feel higher quality, and although it lacks some of the features the 6500 has, it does well at its core focus, which is a relatively affordable box that, if you get the one with fans, has at least the potential for very good cooling and does have very good GPU cooling performance. The C8 undercuts a lot of its competition, just like Montech does, and that means that the $130 base model, which frequently is discounted closer to $100, is competing with the Montech King 95. The King 95 is consistently the cheapest dual chamber case on our charts. It's $100 for the empty model, and the Pro variant with fans costs at least $150, tying the C8 ARGB, and color variants costing more. The K95 Pro comes with twice as many fans as the C8 ARGB, yet the C8 uses its fewer fans more effectively. The C8 is the case that we wish the 6500 had been, and at a significantly lower price. So if nothing else, it's an embarrassment for Corsair, and hopefully a much needed kick in the pants for Corsair to get back into top shape with its cases. When choosing between the C8 and C8 ARGB, mostly you'd consider whether you want to alter the fan layout. If so, you buy the C8, you pick your own fans. The C8 ARGB's 160mm bottom fans can't easily be repositioned or used with a radiator, and the fan hub only has one open slot. The most you could easily do is shift that sort of middle fan to the front. Thermally, the C8 does really well for GPU thermals, and a lot of that is just from these sunken fans. We've talked about it basically half this review now. I'm not going to go back over it again, but that's what's contributing to that really strong GPU performance. And even you look at the Fractal Torrent, and for sort of the noise to thermal, we'll call it efficiency, the C8 is doing really respectably there. Now, the C8 does not do anything completely new. It is another O11 inspired case that appears to be just the meta now. But as far as like metas or archetypes of cases, it's really clear that this fish tank idea, dual chamber thing, it's been the trend for years now. And it seems like the next one is maybe going to be standard tower, standard configuration wood paneled cases, or maybe like the height style chopped corner cases. Either way, the C8 does not innovate in design. It doesn't look in any way particularly different. It is, however, a solid reflection of the existing high-end dual chamber cases at a lower and competitive price. So we think that Antec and Montech in this capacity are sort of the direct competitors. Those are the ones you'd want to look at. If you're really set on a case like this, pick between those two. We think both options, like the K95, could work out well for you. So very impressed with Antec's return. Hopefully they stick with this, because this is what Antec has needed to do for years now. It looks like it's getting serious again. The Flux Pro that we looked at Computex is entirely new tooling. So it's Antec's own design, new tooling, heavy focus on thermals and cooling performance. So it's looking promising. We need to see how it does when we get in for review though. But that's it for this one. Thanks for watching. As always, subscribe for more. Check out our other case reviews, because the new methodology is fully up and running now. And now we're going to finalize that methods piece and get it out to you. But you can support us directly on store.gamingtexas.net, like by buying one of our PC case badges. We'll see you next time.